It would have to be one of the most misunderstood books in the Bible, if not one of the most controversial books of the Bible. And in some high schools, this book of the Bible has actually been banned because it was considered too erotic. Let's have a look at it. We're looking at the Song of Songs. I've mentioned that during the Exilic period, there was wisdom literature that came out of it, and the Song of Solomon is a part of wisdom literature. I said in my brief introduction that it's one of the most misunderstood books in the Bible. Some people claim that the Song of Solomon is a book that extols monogamous married love. They see that it is the marriage of Solomon to a beautiful bride, and it's his love song to her and her response to him. Here's, I think, the immediate problem with that idea that you bring to the text, including when Bible publishers bring that idea to the text and they lead the reader into thinking this is what the text is about. The problem should be obvious. If this is a book extolling monogamous married love, King Solomon is not your guy. In fact, with over 800 wives plus concubines, this guy knew nothing about monogamy at all. What we do find is exactly the same motivation in this book coming out of the exile as all of the other wisdom literature. That is, the wisdom literature that comes out of the exile is a call to return to covenant faithfulness with Yahweh, with God. And this book does that. I want to show you how we can understand this book by digging just a little bit deeper through it, taking what it actually says, not what we're being led to read into it. And what we're going to see is, I think, a truly beautiful story. So, to do that, firstly, the publishers have identified this book in the English Standard Version as the Song of Solomon. I'm going with a different title for this book that occurs perhaps in the opening line. I can see why the publishers would call it the Song of Solomon, but the opening line here says the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. And I'm going to suggest, I think for good reason, since this book comes out of the exile, that this book is what we might call pseudepigraphal. In other words, it's being attributed to Solomon, but I think there's extremely good reasons for us to realize this could not really have been written by Solomon at all. It may not have even been a true event in the life of Solomon. It may not have been. But the author, whoever wrote this book, is using King Solomon as an example to hold up to the returning exiles back to Judea, or back at least to their freedom where they could worship God or not. And here we have an example of a king who knew God, who was blessed by God, and just as we saw in Ecclesiastes, he walked away from the covenant. Now, if Ecclesiastes is correct, Solomon returned, he repented, he came back to realize that he needed to dedicate his life to fear God, which is what we saw in Ecclesiastes. Here we have a story. It sounds, if we are led by the publishers of most English Bibles, that it's a love story between Solomon and one of his brides. But I want to show you why I think there's good reason, and I'm not trying to be original or novel about this. In fact, what I'm going to tell you is ancient. And I'm hoping to show you, not only is it ancient, it actually fits in exactly as I said, with everything else that arose out of the exile period under the banner of wisdom literature. So we see here it's the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. I'm saying that's how the author has presented it, in the same way that the author presented Ecclesiastes, and in the same way that the author or editor or compiler presented the book of Proverbs as well. And then what we're going to find is that there is a love story here, but it's a love story between a young girl who worked on a vineyard and a young boy or young man who was a shepherd. They grow up together. And one day, Solomon comes down to En-gedi to bathe or whatever, and sees this girl and adds her to his harem by force. And we're going to pick the story up in we'll call it the harem, where Solomon's concubines were part of the palace. She is pining for her young lover, and I don't mean that in an impure sense. I mean that in the sense that she grew up loving this shepherd, this young shepherd. So we have a young lady, a young girl who's grown up where a young shepherd would have been working in and around her vineyard, and they grew to love each other. Throughout the Song of Solomon, she will reminisce about their times by the pool of En-gedi, and she will talk about where he might be found, as we'll see in a moment. So she's reminiscing when she says, "Let him kiss me with kisses of his mouth, for your love is better than wine. Your anointing oils are fragrant. Your name is oil poured out. Therefore, virgins love you. Draw me after you. Let us run." And then I'm going to say, "But the king has brought me into his chambers." It's a shock right at the end of this statement. It's not talking about Solomon, as I hope to show you in a moment. In the English Standard Version, the publishers have quite unhelpfully identified, as they suppose, who is speaking in this, and they call this the Others section, where it says, "We will exalt and rejoice in you. We will exalt your love more than wine. Rightly do they love you." She says this, "I am very dark but lovely, O daughters of Jerusalem." And I'm suggesting to you the O daughters of Jerusalem are King Solomon's concubines in this story. But she's saying she's not like one of them. She works outside, and she says, "Like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon, do not gaze at me because I am dark, because the sun has looked upon me." So we now know, I think we should reasonably surmise, she's got a deep tan because she works outside. How did she come to work outside as a young woman? Because presumably, I'm reading into the text, that the vineyard that her family owned and ran suffered a tragedy whereby her parents may have died. And the reason I'm saying her parents have died is because throughout the rest of this, she refers to her brothers, but not to her parents. And so she says, "My mother's sons were angry with me. They bade me keeper of the vineyards, but my own vineyard I have not kept." So I'm saying that here her brothers, for whatever reason, said, "Hey, you got to chip in now. We got a lot of extra work here. We don't have mum and dad around now. We need you to help out. You go and look after the vineyards." She says here, the vineyard. But she hasn't attended to her own vineyard, and this may refer to her relationship with the one whom I'm going to suggest she eventually became betrothed to. "Tell me, you whom my soul loves, where you pasture your flock, where you make it lie down at noon. For why should I be like one who veils herself beside the flocks of your companions?" And here we have her describing her beloved, introducing her beloved as one who pastures his flock, obviously moving them around. And the question is, where are you? Where are you pasturing your flock? And it may be a statement that on the day that Solomon came and took her by force, he was pasturing his flock out of her, or his sight of her. And so the English Standard Version publishers have this as he, which presumably is King Solomon. And I'm suggesting it's not King Solomon at all. It continues to be her conversation with the ones she calls the daughters of Jerusalem, or the concubines of Solomon. And I'm suggesting they are the ones who ask this question in verse 8. If you do not know, O most beautiful among women. She's responding to them, I should say. There is a question that she's responding to. She's just said, my beloved is someone who pastures sheep, he grazes sheep, and that's where he is. And she's already asked, where are you pasturing them? And so she's now responding to that question when she says to the daughters of Jerusalem, the most beautiful among women, follow in the tracks of the flock and pasture your young goats beside the shepherd's tents. Now, that does not sound like Solomon at all. This sounds like her shepherd lover. So we go on, and I just want to point out here that as we move into chapter 2, we can see that there is good reason to believe that the distance from En-Gedi, which is referred to in this text, and Jerusalem is about 50 kilometres. And quite possibly her young lover, her shepherd lover, who was now betrothed to her, possibly with the idea that they would, readily enough, get married at the appropriate time. He's now come to Jerusalem looking for her to take her back. So we read in verse 8, the voice of my beloved, behold, he comes, leaping over the mountains. Now the rest of this is poetry. It's describing her beloved coming to Jerusalem to get her back. Again, this is just odd if we're talking about Solomon. Of course, his palace was in Jerusalem. Leaping over the mountains, bounding over the hills, my beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. Behold, there he stands behind our wall, gazing through the windows, looking through the lattice. My beloved speaks and says to me, arise, my love, my beautiful one, and come away. So he's calling for her, wherever you are, come out. I'm here to take you back. She says, verse 16, my beloved is mine, and I am his. He grazes among the lilies. Until the day breathes and the shadows flee, turn, my beloved, like a gazelle or a young stag on cleft mountains. So this language is very rural. It's very agricultural. This is not about a king in finery and robes enjoying the palace life. And so this is how we, I think, can better understand the text, by just letting the text speak. And so we come to chapter 3, and she's now heard him. She's said he's calling out. She now is able to recollect. I've heard him. I've heard him call, and he's calling out to her. And so even though it was possibly night time, in fact, not even possibly, it was night time, we read in chapter 3, on my bed by night I sought him whom my soul loves. I sought him, but found him not. I will rise now and go about the city, in the streets and in the squares. I will seek him whom my soul loves. I sought him, but found him not. And then we have verse 3, this expression, the watchman. So now we're talking at night. It's in the evening, nighttime. You have the night watchman, so to speak, and there they are guarding the harem, I suppose, and guarding what belongs to Solomon, And so let's pick it up, verse 3 of chapter 3. The watchmen found me as they went about in the city. Have you seen him whom my soul loves? She asks the night watchman. Verse 4, scarcely had I passed them when I found him whom my soul loves. I held him and would not let him go until I had brought him into my mother's house and into the chamber of her who conceived me. This is not what she wants to. She doesn't want to take Solomon back to her family ancestral home. But it makes more sense that she is content when her beloved, her betrothed, has taken her back to her home near En-gedi, where her family vineyard was. And so what we have here is this expression that will occur a few times. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles and does of the field. Note the very rural expression, that you do not stir up or awaken love until it pleases, which sounds to me like don't say anything. In other words, don't let Solomon know that I'm about to go back. I'm fleeing the city. My beloved, my shepherd lover has come. He's come to get me. I'm betrothed to him. He is the one to whom my soul belongs to, and we will be wed soon. Don't tell Solomon. Do not, I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, do not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. And so what happens? We read in chapter 3 from verse 6 that Solomon does hear about it. And he is ticked. What's he going to do? What is that coming up from the wilderness like columns of smoke, perfumed with myrrh and frankincense, with all the fragrant powders of a merchant? Behold, it is the litter of Solomon. Okay, so what's going on? He's coming back down to En-gedi, where he first found her and took her. And what's he doing now? Well, around it are 60 mighty men, some of the mighty men of Israel, all of them wearing swords and expert in war, each with his sword at his thigh, against terror by night. King Solomon, made himself a carriage from the wood of Lebanon. He made its posts of silver, its back of gold, its seat of purple. Its interior was inlaid with love by the daughters of Jerusalem. And so here you have this young girl now who is being taken back by the force of Solomon's army. This doesn't sound like a very convivial courtship that's happening here. He's come out with 60 soldiers armed with swords and spears. Flip. And so this is clearly not a great love story between Solomon and this girl.